Peikoff Fridays. It is so good to be with you with James Valliant, the authority, having Peikoff Fridays, and we are right smack dab in the middle of it. You know what I'm talking about. You've been following Keeping It Real. We have been going through this outstanding book, Keeping It Real, Leonard Peikoff's answers to podcast questions. Over 1,000 questions, 500 of them are in the book, subtitled Bringing Ideas Down to Earth. Well, speaking of bringing things down to earth, we're discussing religion. Now, this will actually be our third episode on this topic.
Yes.
We did the first one more general, this time applying this to your life. What do you do in contexts where you have to deal with religion? How do you be an atheist in a religious world?
In a mystical society, yeah.
Now, James, last week we covered 6 out of these 10 questions related to that subject. And we went from my parents don't know I'm an atheist, what do I do, to should I pursue a romantic relationship with an atheist? And you had some great answers and even some personal insights.
Yes.
How are you doing this afternoon?
I'm doing great, actually. The last couple of weeks have presented a bunch of challenges for me personally. But, particularly in this context, I find this very topic, these questions and answers that Peikoff's giving are actually very helpful for getting through. One of the questions we had earlier about religion is, isn't it a comfort to people in difficult times?
Yes.
And I think the upshot that we had there is no, it's really just an evasion. What really gives you comfort is confronting reality, doing the things we can do something about, accepting the things we can't, and fully accepting that. And sometimes that's not a pleasant thing at all. And the wisdom to know the difference. And, in the broader context too, we realized in our earlier discussions, we identified that religion, although an inevitable part of human development, probably, it's a mistake. And like many mistakes, it is sometimes a dishonest error, the upshot of evasion, but not always. Given the context of a situation, not always. But a bad idea, if it's a harmful idea, and the more philosophical idea, the more ground it covers, and the more potential harm or benefit it can bring if it's adopted. So whether or not someone is innocent in their belief in, say, the supernatural, and that becomes harder and harder as we learn more and more as a society. But there are still, as Peikoff points out, lots of innocent, well-meaning people who still at least identify as being religious. It's really not a question of personal fault. An earthquake is a harmful thing, all other things being equal, whether people recognize it or not. I'll give you another example. Say, in medicine, for many centuries, it was thought that bleeding sick people actually would help them. And so the physician would come in and he would say, we got to get rid of those evil humors that are lurking in your body and causing those diseases. So they would literally, people who are sick and weak, they would drain blood from them. The last thing they need in the world.
Apply the leeches.
Yes.
So it doesn't matter whether or not the idea was believed sincerely or not at one time. It's a question of the actual harm. So if someone actually continued to advocate, say, leeching or bleeding as a medical procedure today, you would say, it's bad. We cannot sanction it. We've got to bring an end to it if human beings are going to make progress here. And the same applies to religion. And with that introduction, let's get into it.
Yes, truth matters.
Yes,
reality matters. And I think that's a theme we'll see throughout the discussion today.
Absolutely. And if people are raised with the belief that leeches and bloodletting are good for you, they need to test that as an adult. And, so it isn't always the case that even though children are indoctrinated, they grow up as adults and they have all these ideas around them to question what their beliefs are. So it does come to the point, so for a lot of times, it comes to the point of dishonesty. But before we go on, I just want to say a special episode because we are broadcasting today from the 2019 OCON location in Cleveland, Ohio. And
that was one of my favorite OCONs. And here we are back at the
It's a great OCON.
Not for OCON, but
some of the fondest memories of my life from that OCON.
I know.
So,
wasn't that great?
Warm spot in my heart for I can recognize it.
I wish we could meet you for oysters again down by the river, but let's jump into this topic here. because there are still people who believe in cutting or leeches, and in less harmful ways. And we'll start with one of those real quick. So, what should one do if asked to be a bridesmaid in a wedding, but feels uncomfortable with the religious aspects of this honor? And in Leonard Peikoff, the first paragraph here, I'll read this, and then his sum. As I gather from your question, you have no problem with your friend's husband or with her getting married to him. And you have no problem with her being religious, because otherwise you wouldn't be a friend and religion wouldn't come up. If that's true, I don't see any problem with your participating in a religious setting. I don't see that as your sanction of a religion. He says, if on some occasion, which can have an obvious secular base, you follow the rites for an hour or two, you're not helping to spread religion. And he goes on, but that was the important distinction there, that you're not spreading the religion, you're not sanctioning the religion, because nobody assumes that just because you're at a religious wedding, you are therefore putting your stamp of approval on the religious aspect. Weddings are bigger than religion.
Yeah.
And there is one, it's a delimited event as well. So it's not that you're going there.
Did that one seem pretty straightforward to you, sir?
Yeah, there's a very important moral point in objectivism, the sanction of the victim. And Ayn Rand describes it in powerful detail in Atlas Shrugged. She also has a speech entitled The Sanction of the Victim, directed at businessmen. I recommend, of course, if you haven't read either of those, to please go read those, because you'll get a really good idea of it. When we know that something is harmful, anti-life, a disvalue or an anti-value to human beings, to support that idea, to give it aid and comfort, to knowingly support it, even in an implicit way, is to further that harm, is to spread the poison. And what is the famous line, all it takes for evil to prevail is for good people to do nothing. It's when the good man fails to do what he knows is right that really supports evil. Evil in itself, as Ayn Rand understood it, is fundamentally weak, incompetent, really unable to achieve. It's not this powerful, Darth Vader sense of evil. Quite the opposite. It really only survives by the sanction that good people give it. One of the powerful themes of Atlas Shrugged. And so the question is, if we disapprove of a religion, if we think it is so harmful and socially destructive and psychologically destructive for those who accept it, why should we even ever participate, in a friend's wedding if it happens to be a religious service of some kind? Well, obviously, everyone has the implicit idea that when you go to a wedding or, a baptism or something, or, the equivalent of that it's a family event and that people of various religions are attending, because it's really a celebration of the marriage more than it is, my sanctioning their religion. It's my sanctioning their marriage. It's my joy in their happiness. It's not about so much the religion. It is for them. They've chosen a particular way in which to make this commitment to one another and which to make promises to each other. I appreciate and honor that part. I'm not, when I attend a wedding, or even if I participate as a best man or a maid of honor, I'm not sanctioning the religion. I'm sanctioning the relationship. And Peikoff begins it quite properly. There are contexts when someone's an irrational mystic, self-destructive and maybe harmful to others kind of advocate of rank mysticism. Well, they'd probably not be your friend, given your understanding of the truth here. But so long as you understand, remember the earlier question that Peikoff had, well, it all depends on how seriously they take religion, how they understand religion, what role philosophy and religion plays in their life. All of those are relevant to my relationship with someone who might say believe in God. So presuming that you have no problem with your friend's beliefs, presuming that your friendship is A-okay in your mind, what possible harm could there be? The wedding's going to happen anyway, and your being there isn't some particular endorsement of that specific sectarian faith. What it is it's I'm happy for your happiness. It's about the relationship more than a sanction of the religion there.
Excellent. Now I'm just going to read the rest of his answer because this is going to affect or connect to some of the later questions here. He also said, the people there know perfectly well that all different religious and no religions come from these things. I have gone to a couple of such occasions, a Catholic wedding and a confirmation. When everybody knelt, I knelt too because I didn't want to affront them by standing. I didn't pray because it was quiet and it would be senseless. Had it been done out loud, though, I would have done it for a short amount of time, depending also on the context, but I wouldn't have a problem with it, even if it had to be done under these circumstances. Now, again, because it's part of the ceremony, it's not a sanction of religion, and you're not in any way going out and proselytizing or advancing religion. I think I understand what Dr. Peikoff is saying at that point. Now,
I do. I have to admit, I may have a very slight marginal difference with Peikoff here, but it's only a slight one. I'm happy to go to religious services. I'm even going to kneel on the little kneel bar in the Catholic or Orthodox Church if necessary. But when the priest says, let's lower our head in prayer, almost like I do it on purpose, my head is up and I'm looking around like that. Now,
refuse to be humble.
The presumption that I have is that if you really believe, your head's down and you're not seeing me at all. I'm not offending anyone who's actually praying. But for my own, it's totally within my own head. I'm not doing it. But otherwise, I agree with him. Yeah, absolutely. I have no problem. In other words, doing what the priest says in handing the ring to the guy getting married if I'm the best man, even if he does it in a prayer. No problem there. None at all. Because it's about them and their beliefs, their commitment to each other. And I regard philosophy as important. I regard the fact that they're invoking their philosophical beliefs as this moral support for their long-term commitment as a positive thing. So that's all I feel like I'm sanctioning in that context.
I'm glad, though, that you see there's a bit of a tension there, because we'll get into that with the next question. But first, I have to say thank you for the super chat to Apollo Zeus, who's in for £2 and says, because I like it. And I assume he means the Ayn Rand Center UK, because if you put in a super chat right now, you good people in the chat, that money does go to support the ARCUK. Anything that you contribute, and you can get your question to stand out so we don't miss you in the chat, because we like you too. Also, our producer has put up a poll and asked, would you go to a religious wedding? So far, 83% of you have said yes, 17% have said no, and the producer, Daniel, did put in a poison pill there for some, I don't know, trying to catch some people there. He said, yes, but only Christian ones. Believe me, I have run into that mentality. And fortunately, at least in our the best crowding podcast audiences out there, 0% of you. So nobody fell for that.
Oh, are you kidding? Catholic weddings, Jewish weddings. Oh, they can be some of the funnest parties that I've Catholic weddings, and Jewish weddings are some of the funnest events you'll ever attend in your life. I just wanted to throw that in too. In my experience, they generally know how to celebrate. So
it shows how serious they take their piousness. Their
That's
piety.
it.
Now, as somebody who could become a bridesmaid someday, I've never been one. I would say I do have a lot of friends and who are non-religious, and or I should say religious, and I would certainly stand up and become a bridesmaid. And now, if they did ask me to do something that is, they would know already that I'm an atheist. If they wanted me to recite a particular biblical reference, for instance, I might counter that with, I can find a lovely quote, a lovely secular quote that I could instead use, if that is okay with you. Now, as you know, probably since you wrote Creating Christ and you know the Bible inside and out, there are probably some more secular, more wisdom-based things that the Romans wrote.
Yeah.
And
no, there are some beautiful praises to erotic love found in Hebrew scripture. The Song of Solomon is really an erotic poem written more than 2,300 years ago. And there are some really lovely praises of the human body and even erotic love that you can find, at least in the Hebrew part of the Bible. But there's also that famous quote from Paul in his letters, about love, and it's quoted at many, many, many weddings. And there may be parts of it that I would maybe take interpretive difference with, but I can retranslate that into my own language. I can understand how rational, loving people could admire such a quote. And so, yeah, I have no problem with a quotation from the Bible as such, so long as, I'm reminded here of this wonderful moment from Love Letters, where, Singleton, obviously this alter ego for Ayn Rand's values, is being talked about with a priest about getting married. And the priest asked, "Do you read your Bible?" And she said, "Oh yeah, particularly my favorite from the Bible is this one quote: 'What should it profit a man should he gain the whole world but lose his own soul?'" And then she connects it up to the theme of the movie. But that was one of Ayn Rand's favorite. Ayn Rand had favorite bits from the Bible. And I think that's an important thing to remember. Just because something is in a wider context that we disagree with doesn't mean that we can't find something we can pull out and find common ground, at least on an ad hoc basis with. Make sense?
Of the appearance of that line in the Fountainhead, incidentally, when somebody doesn't know better asks Ellsworth Toohey that question. Of course, being the villain of the story, he says, "Well, in that case, one should seek to collect souls." And a bit of a spoiler alert, that's exactly what he goes on to do. Now, the next question dovetails beautifully off of this one with a completely different answer. So how do we answer this question? Is it wrong for a musician? Now, of course, this hit home with us.
Yeah.
Is
Getting
it
a little
wrong for
personal
a
there,
musician?
Robert.
I know. I've got to rethink my career path here. Is it wrong for a musician who is an atheist to accept money to play at a religious service?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. This was not intuitive in terms of what we thought. Dr.
Well,
Peikoff's
especially
answer
if it's reasonable to be a bridesmaid at a religious wedding. But what about a musician accepting money to play at a religious? Now, there's two elements there, but let me get to Leonard's answer, and then we can pick this apart a little bit. Because, again, if you understood the previous answer, this might surprise you. Leonard said, I try to bend over backward in these podcasts to be quote unquote tolerant. But here I have to draw the line. I think that's wrong. I had a question recently about a bridesmaid who was worried about participating in a wedding ceremony in a church. And I said, well, that's okay because it's recognized to be a concrete event. It's a wedding. You're not doing anything to support the continuation of the church. But in the present case, you are. An essential of the service is the music. So you are, within your limits, enabling it to take place. Moreover, you can't say the church controls all musical outlets and therefore there's no way for you to be a musician. That is not true. There are plenty of ways for you to be a musician. I don't see that you have a moral or practical justification. I think you're actively helping to promote, assist, and abet an evil. Of course, it would be worse if you wrote sermons denouncing the prophet Moses. But this is still an element, even if less crucial. Now that's interesting. And not that I disagree, it's just a bit of a change from the previous question.
Isn't it interesting?
Yeah.
You don't so Robert, you wouldn't hand out cards saying I do bar mitzvahs and weddings. I'll play any gig, right? You don't play any gig. You don't do bar mitzvahs and weddings.
That's an interesting question. We could try to find the real borderline cases of would you play your sister's wedding?
Yeah.
Well, you see,
if you weren't doing it for money's sake and it was limited to one event.
I think if that were the context, I think Peikoff would have had a slightly different answer. If it's one event and it is your sister and you're not going to make a habit of doing this at religious events, right? And if it's your sister's, you're probably doing it for free anyway.
Right. Yeah, right.
The thrust of this is, are you making your living in any real way by supporting something you regard as wrong, harmful? Now think about that. Would you really be profiting? Would you, in the long run, as an egoist, truly be profiting if you are acting for the destruction of your longer term, higher values by just taking money in the meantime? No, objectivism says this in many contexts and across the board. To take the short term quote, profit financially from something that is in fact a long-term destruction of your higher values is absolutely, it's just a lack of integrity. It's a lack of knowing your own values. It's a lack of understanding the hierarchy of your own values. Like I say, if you make an exception and you do a free gig for your sister's wedding, that's one thing. But if you're making a living and part of your living is to support religious services as such, even for strangers, and you're on the take for that, obviously they're giving you the money because they're getting a value. And you're giving an ongoing value to something you regard as long-term destruction. I would think very carefully about how seriously you take your philosophical ideas. I would think through what you are doing to your values, your real values in the long run, because that's what's happening. It's sometimes people will rationalize long-term suicide, saying, well, there's a short-term gain. Well, no. Ayn Rand's view of egoism is that there is no such trade-off to be made. No, there can be no short-term gain if it involves a long-term loss of a higher value. That's sacrifice. That's madness. Do not do that. Do not act as your own destroyer, Dagny. If I can paraphrase John Galt, please stop acting as your own destroyer, Dagny, is really my only response.
Now
Make sense?
There's another distinction that we'll get into with the next question, but applies to this one too, which is, what if money wasn't part of it, but doing it on a regular basis was, whether for the experience, the exposure, or just for the fun of it? So even without money in the question, I still think there's a real question of, are you sanctioning or advocating religion by your actions, even if you're not religious and you don't want to be doing that?
Yeah, actually, before we get into that, next thing is, I used to be part of a Redford Civic Symphony for a couple of years, and we actually played in some churches. Sometimes we played in, halls and pavilions and things like that, that were secular, community oriented. But yeah, no, I played in churches. Now, most of what we played was not religious, or all of it, but it wasn't, and I was not paid. But yeah.
Some of the finest music concerts here in Southern California are done at religious facilities. There are some large churches in Los Angeles that are famous for symphony orchestras coming from around the world, coming there to play because of the acoustics and so forth. That is, generally speaking, a concert. And I go there in terms of a concert. I'm going there to listen to Handel or Bach, who both wrote extensively, religious music extensively. I'm going there to listen to Handel and Bach and their music. I'm not going there to endorse the content of Handel's Messiah, all right, or Matthew's Passion by Bach.
Right.
And so long as I make that distinction, it's the symphony orchestra or the choir that I'm going to hear that I'm sanctioning in that context. Now, if it were a practice of mine to go to the religious service and play there, now I think we've crossed the line, because now what you're doing is you're lending your talents to the support of the religious ritual and the religious institution, as opposed to, say, the music and the musical institution, and that just happens to be the venue. Make sense?
Absolutely. Good.
So we do have another super chat from Mark Swilkowski, who does have a question too, but is in for 50 Swedish krona. Very much thank you for that.
Thank you.
And he asks, this is a very different question. We might do this after the end of the show, or maybe you want to just give a quick answer right now. Is there anything misguided about enjoying religious architecture or art?
Oh, no. So long as you distinguish, there's a quick, easy answer. Some of the greatest art that has ever been made has religious subject. And it's, very frequently, it's not the explicit subject of the art that makes it great art, but its sense of life. That's what we're responding to in art. And sometimes merely because someone has a painting of, say, a religious story does not tell you how they're going to treat it. Distinguish in your mind, for example, the Dark Age depictions in their art of, say, the Madonna and the baby Jesus, who's, looks 40
Right.
years old, needs a shave. She's holding in this flat, two-dimensional, sort of grim, life is
Yeah.
not a happy situation. Even though
Yeah.
she's a mother with a newborn baby, it's not a happy situation. As opposed to, say, a Raphael, where you have the love of the Madonna looking at this beautiful baby in her arms. And now suddenly it's like the contrast between the two is so sharp. One is benevolent, pro-life, all about love, and it's life affirming. The other is just the opposite. So sometimes it's not so much the content as it is the sense of life and the style that's expressing it. And there is nothing wrong. Ayn Rand's favorite novelists were Victor Hugo and Fyodor Dostoevsky, both of whom were Christians. One was a Christian socialist, one was a Christian conservative, but both of whom were expressing in their own ways Christian values. And she thought those were the apex of literary art in the Western world. So, yeah.
I have to agree with Christopher Hitchens when he says, despite his constant criticism of religion, there are things in religious art that, at least at this point in history, have not been equaled elsewhere.
Right.
You look at Michelangelo's David, which is about David, or many of the pietas that have been done. Magnificent works of art.
Yes, I mean, and also consider Ayn Rand's 25th anniversary Forward to the Fountainhead, and where she explains that in religion you have concepts like sacredness and being what's the word, ecstatic or so you have these ideas in religion that do have a reality basis in terms of the life of human beings.
One of my tests, if you went to Florence and you walked into the Accademia and you witnessed David without any religious education at all, you have no idea of the story of David and Goliath, but you just walk in and you see this giant marble statue of this magnificent young man. You don't know who David was. You have no idea. And art should stand on its own. What you'd walk away with was this would be the idea that this guy regards humanity with such nobility, with such majesty. You'd say, he is saying something about humanity. And you wouldn't need the Bible story to know what a magnificent view of humanity he has. Look at that thing. It is an ode to humanity and its potential. And you don't need, in fact, the story is sort of a sideline to all that. The theme of the David as a statue is the magnificence, the heroic potential of humanity. And that's what he's saying. By knowing the story, it's true, but you wouldn't need any of that story to get the real message, the objective message that comes across, and that doesn't need a literary footnote. Humanity is this potentially heroic, magnificent thing. That's what I get from the David.
So thank you very much to Mark, both for the contribution to ARCUK and for that great question, which again is a little bit of a diversion, but not too much.
Yeah.
No.
And anything that supports the channel is a good thing. Now, if you're not already a member of the Ayn Rand Center UK, you got to make that happen. AynRandCenter.co.uk/membership. Link will show up in the chat in just a moment. You need to be a member. But any super chats that you put in, keep them coming. We've got a couple already. Will help support the channel. I'm going to jump right to the next question because you'll see that distinction I made of even if it wasn't bringing in money, even if we weren't doing it. Well, let me get to the question. Dr. Peikoff was asked, would it be immoral to take a job helping someone write a book which attempts to present rational arguments for the existence of a God? And Leonard Peikoff answers, well, I try to bend over it's interesting, this prelude, because he kind of said this last time. I try to bend over backwards and not to moralize and inhibit people and to emphasize choice as legitimate. But in this case, yes.
Yes, that would be immoral.
I would consider that immoral because you are lending your mind to help spread ideas which are destroying the world and yourself. The only thing that could justify this would be if you lived in a dictatorship, or if you would otherwise starve. I myself would starve or emigrate. Actually, if necessary, I would steal because I think that's a much lesser crime than to promote ideas which will kill all values, yours and everybody else's. Now, that's pretty straightforward, and yet there's a lot in there. What do you think, James?
This one is worse than the musician. Even though the musician may be taking money, and I don't know what the money situation would be for this guy who's helping write the book. The money situation, this is not what's bothering me. What's bothering me is what Peikoff put his finger on there. You're lending your creative mind, your mind, your very faculty of awareness is being used to distort the awareness of everyone else. Wow.
Yeah.
If you do not believe in the supernatural and you are helping to persuade others to believe in the supernatural, if you are not a mystic and you are helping others, encouraging others to think irrationally, wow, you are undermining your values in such an explicit way. You are shooting yourself in both feet and both hands, not just one foot. This is insane. This is far worse than merely taking some money and financially giving some support. You're actually giving them the long-term support they need, the sanction of a rational mind, and you're deceiving people. My God, you are an agent of evil when you do that. I'm sorry. If you really understand what religion is and the harm it causes to humanity, and you're helping to advocate it, support it, persuade people that it's okay, no, I'm sorry. You are you are, wittingly or not, you're an
glad
agent.
you shared that reaction, because I had a similar reaction to the previous question, in that it's almost not as bad if you are taking money. That is a moral pragmatism, but at least it's not a decision to do for no other reason other than, well, I can think of other secondhand reasons besides money, but yes.
Peikoff had a great answer to one of these questions, a similar question that comes to mind right now. He said, you'd be better off, someone gave him the thing, should I do this or should I do that? He said, you'd be better off spending your money on orgies and drugs, frankly. It would be better, sir. Yes. I sort of feel that same way. It's not really so much a question of the money, it's what you're putting it to that's so much more evil. That's so much more comprehensively evil than even simply, an irresponsible act of sex or, something. Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely.
Yes. So the producer has posted another poll, and this one says, would you rather starve or survive by advocating evil ideas? Now, that's a tough one, because
it's a tough one. It depends on the context.
Would you rather die?
Yeah.
Or advocate evil ideas? I don't know. I mean, advocating evil ideas is the death of your spirit. I'm not sure there's a good answer for that.
If I had a gun to my head and they gave me the script to read, right?
Right.
What I'm reminded of here is John Galt at the end of Atlas Shrugged, when they asked him to do in effect the same thing. He will not. You can kill me. You can torture me. Guess what? I'm not going to help you. I'm not going to pull your rear end out of this problem. And I'm not even going to make it look like I sanction you people.
Right.
Now, it's true that in that context, the fate of the world is on the line. Yes. For ordinary people, and I have to say, in most contexts, if someone just puts a gun to my head and says, read this, I'm going to read this. And then 5 minutes later, when I'm out of that situation with the gun, I'm going to say, why I said that. The only reason I said that was the gun was to my head. And I didn't believe that at all. So in most contexts, I would have to say, yes, if the fate of the world hinges on it, I would go down. I would go down. The situation, as a prosecutor, I face situations that are morally the equivalent of this. What if someone kidnaps you and says, go rob a bank? I've got a bomb attached to you, or I've got your child kidnapped at home. And if you do not rob the bank for me, I'm going to kill your child or I'm going to blow you up.
Right.
Whoa, what choice do you possibly have? You are, in effect, been rendered a slave to them. I regard that kind of a situation as the same. Now, it is true that if I had any other option, frankly, I asked myself, what if that was the case? Could I engage, for example, in an armed robbery, stick a gun in someone's head, even though my child was being threatened? Talk about a Sophie's choice moment, right? What a horrific moral choice. But frankly, once the gun is put to your head, it is no longer a truly moral choice, is it? You are being compelled to do something evil. Some evil consequence will happen. And that's my test. If there's another option, if there's just one, give me just one little crack in the door to escape from, I'm going to take that crack in the door so I don't have to advocate what I know to be the most destructive thing in human history, bad ideas.
Yeah.
Good. Well, regular listeners and viewers will remember we discussed this in the context of soldiers in wars. I think we discussed the Korean War, the Vietnam War, who were captured and were put in front of cameras and forced by their captors to denounce the United States or denounce the war effort. And Leonard Peikoff at that time made exactly that point, that the thing for them to do was to do whatever they were told until the guns were gone. And the thing for the president of the United States to do was to say, yes, any soldiers out there put in that position, lie through your teeth. We in the United States will know not to take it to heart. And that's exactly right. You do what you've got to do to get through the moment. But yes, I think a lot of people, with 50% of people said starve, answered it from the perspective, well, yeah, but what if there was no way out? What if you had to spend the rest of your life
Under
compromising your
Yeah.
ideals? And yes, you're right. At that point, you either starve physically or you starve spiritually. And this will relate to the last of the questions, which we could easily fill the next 20 minutes with. Let's see where we go with this. Because this brought together the few different threads that I've kind of been weaving here. Is it immoral to profit from promoting mysticism? For instance, would it be wrong to make a Bible app for the iPhone? Now, this is a few years ago, so making apps was making people, it still is making people rich. Nowadays, I guess you'd make it multi-platform. But yeah, is it wrong to make a Bible app for the iPhone? And Leonard Peikoff answers. He says, in my judgment, yes, that would be immoral. I think it's okay to do work that you regard as simply wasteful, a waste of time. It's also okay to do work that is potentially harmful if misused. For instance, I don't see anything wrong if you make cigarettes, casino chips, alcohol, and so on. But a job whose essence is to spread the very ideas destroying the world, I can't see how you can justify that if life is your standard. And then he gives some great examples. I'll skip a little bit. He says, it's true that in many mixed jobs, there can be some real value and some contradictions. And that is a big question. You have to decide which outweighs which. For instance, Salvador Dali is a great painter in certain ways. And in other ways, the surrealists were horrible. Now imagine you're working in an art gallery whose function is to promote Dali. I don't know. I think Ayn Rand loved his style so much that she would have, but you might hate his content so much that you wouldn't. And then he goes back to the question, we're not talking about a mixed case here, though. You're talking about something that is through and through, not only mysticism and altruism, but the particular form of mysticism and altruism that is vying to become a ruler of this country. Now, I have to say, this was May 2011 he said this. And it was obvious to Leonard Peikoff in May of 2011 that religion was the dominant force attempting to destroy the world. Now in 2022, what do we think of his prescience in that regard?
I'm still impressed, and frankly, I still think the greater long-term threat to America is the religious right. Religion in some form, whether it absorbs environmentalism and finds some, way of integrating all the bad ideas under one rubric. Sort of like, I know Hitler comparisons are usually unfair, and I don't mean to say that there's an actual Hitler out there right now, an actual Hitler out there right now. No. But Hitler, you see, sort of brought together the worst elements from both the left and the right in his time, and under a sort of neo-mystical banner of irrational emotionalism. And I still think that some form of fascism, maybe not Adolf Hitler, some form of fascism with some kind of mystical religious base is the greater long-term fear for America. I still agree with Dr. Peikoff very much with that idea. In fact, the years have only increased my view that way. And next week, just as an advertisement for what we get to, we're going to get into the political and legal stuff about religion next time in part 3 of this discussion, because Dr. Peikoff has some excellent discussion of these very sorts of issues, the history and religion, history, or politics and religion, history and religion. But yeah, the distinction that I would draw that's important here, if you work for a big publishing company and they publish, say, books by atheists, and they publish, say, Bibles and Qurans, and they publish popular novels, I don't think you're doing anything in particular to support religion there, because the publisher publishes books that are critical of religion and publishes, religious tracts. But working for a publisher that's that open-ended and neutral is one thing. Doing an app, developing the next, smartphone app for Bible verses or pray with me, and like I say, there are all kinds of, you've probably heard the ads on television about how you can download the app and pray every day or get a Bible verse every day, read the Bible along with Charlton Heston on your app, those kind of apps. If you're doing something specific like that, and if you have a choice not to do it, obviously what you're doing again is you're doing something even worse than sort of taking money. And here the context is profiting from it. But if you are knowingly spreading ideas you believe to be harmful, stop, think what you're doing. You are spreading ideas you know to be harmful. And whatever short-term gain you might be thinking you're making is actually coming at the cost of your long-term values. If this world is less than happy for you because of its mystical irrationality, that is what you're supporting. For what? For what? Some short-term profit? No, that makes no sense. It's like what Ayn Rand says. It's like the price of getting into a museum is pulling out your eyes. That would make no sense to me, whatever. It's self-destructive in the long, it's contradictory to your values in the long run. And that's what philosophy in general can do. It gets us to focus on what the hierarchy of our values are. If we're confident in our philosophy, our abstract values, then we know the harm that bad ideas do. And the more philosophical the ideas, I say, the more territory it takes in and the more harmful its effect must be. So philosophical ideas at this level, something we said earlier, religion is the source for most of the problems of philosophy over the last millennia. It explains Descartes, all his errors, really. It really does. That primacy of conscience. Kant, it explains his errors. Hume, his skepticism was the result of the errors that people like Descartes and Locke were making because of their Christian perspective. The mind-body dichotomy, the theory-practice dichotomy, all of these false dichotomies that Ayn Rand was so brilliant at refuting have their roots in religion, in that severing of the real from the ideal that must come about when you, simply by positing the supernatural, as I say, diminishes this world thereby. Once you grasp that, to the extent you grasp that, how can you possibly help promote religious ideas? That's what's destroying how people think. That's what's inducing unearned guilt. That's what's keeping the morality, the moral high ground for socialists, because socialism is just Christian morality, made political. So when you realize the power of philosophical ideas and the harm of mystical ideas in particular, can there really be any, can you ever be supporting your values or interests if you're somehow just, I'm going to just do this Bible app, and boy, it's a very popular thing. Who knows, I could make $1 million on this Bible app. No, that $1 million can't do you any good. It's be just like that $1 million that some Texas oil man offered Ayn Rand. But what the hell good would it do to me? I'd be destroying the whole basis of my philosophy. For what? Even for $1 million. It's a no-brainer choice for her.
Right. Yeah, you can't sell that at that cheap price. not even.
But something,
literally selling out.
But Ayn Rand was an amazingly, talk about the tolerant part, like the bridesmaid answer. Ayn Rand was not, in this sense, a militant atheist at all. She was very confident in her atheism. Atheism is not a positive belief at all. It's just rejecting one false belief. She understood it in that context. It was her commitment to reason and reality as absolutes that made her an atheist. And so she was firm on that. And she understood maybe better than any previous philosopher the harm that religion had done to the Western mind. And even with all that understanding, even being the strong atheist, the positive atheist, as they call it, she affirmatively believed that there was no God. And so she's not even one of these wishy-washy agnostics, just the opposite.
Right.
Even with all that said, strong atheist, positive atheist here in the strongest sense of the term, she still, Tom Snyder, in one of her last television interviews, said, at the end of the interview, I would just say he loved her. He was charmed by her. But he talked about his own religious upbringing and how he was less religious over the years. But and after the discussion with religion, where they kind of agreed to a large extent, he ended the conversation on purpose with I'd say, God bless you, Ayn Rand. And Ayn Rand thought about it for a second. She get back, and I'd say, God bless to you. And he was sort of taken aback. And she said, well, it's not that I endorse the mystical content or literally believe in a God at all. It's just that I like what that saying means. If God means the highest conceivable or the highest possible to you, then that is what I'll invoke in a blessing. Thank you from the highest values I have, in effect, is what she's saying when she says God bless you. So, in most ordinary social contexts, I told the story of how I went off the one time in my life at that priest when the day my brother died. Yeah. It was that context for me. I do not normally go off. If someone comes up to me and says to me, I'm sorry your loved one has passed away. I'm sorry your loved one is feeling, ill, or I'm sorry your loved one, and I'm praying for them. I do not say, oh, well, hell with you, you evil person, for praying for my loved one. No, I say, thank you. Thank you for the good wishes. Thank you for the kind thoughts. If a friend, a relative dies and someone says they're in a better place now, I don't have to make that the moment when I argue against an immortal soul or an infinite afterlife. No. What I'll say is something equivalent, but nice without lying, like, at least the suffering is gone. At least they're no longer in pain. Something like that. Or I'd celebrate their life. Oh, what a wonderful person they were, and how I'm going to terribly miss that irreplaceable value.
Bring it back to
nice
reality.
ways. Yes, there's nice ways of doing that without, in those contexts, being offensive for no reason. But when it comes to profiting, when it comes to supporting and advocating, we have to draw a line, because there we're actually helping promote and advance ideas we know to be self-destructive and destructive of humanity in the long run. And that would be evil. And we've got to appreciate the power of our sanction. Appreciate the power of our sanction. If someone were to follow up, say, with that conversation with me and insist on an answer from me, they say, well, they're in a better place. And I say, well, at least their suffering's gone. And they say, no. They're in heaven now with God. And they're up there with all of the other dead people that we miss. What do you think of that, Jim? I'm afraid I have to say, no, I don't believe that's the case, but they'll always be in my memory. Right, something like that.
Absolutely. And depending on who is telling you that your loved one is in a better place, I would go back to them and I'd say, I feel sad when you tell me that, because I know you can think better than that. I know that you can, I'm your friend. I don't think you really truly believe that. And I'm just sad that you can't conceive that our body and our mind, our soul cannot continue on after we die. So I just, and you can explain it that way and just say,
well, maybe with somebody you're close enough with.
Yeah, if you're close enough with them.
But
just
express
your emotion to them that you're sad about. You're sad that they're not thinking this through.
Right. I mean, I could go on and give them the big, John Galt lecture about how, a separated soul from a separated body is symbolized corpses and ghosts, both symbols of death. And that's what happens anytime a religion comes in. It drives a wedge between body and soul, and therefore you're an advocate of ghosts and corpses. i.e., you're a preacher of death. Now, I could go on and give them a harsh analogy straight from John Gall, but really that will depend upon the context, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Excellent. And yeah, I really thought it was important to point out that although the profit makes it more corrupt and more pragmatic, more amoral, even without the fact that the publisher is going to profit from it, or the musician is going to profit, throw that out the window. And it almost becomes worse because it goes from being amoral to being immoral.
Yeah.
Where you are not just doing something for, I shouldn't say just, because that's a bad thing too, but you're not just doing it for pragmatic reasons, you're actually betraying your values without even the money.
Without a pork chop in return is
Whether
Without
you're
a
doing
pork
that-
chop in return, exactly.
Yeah.
As Franco Connor said.
In a way, that is just, you know, if I do have a context, even if I'm working at a huge publishing house like Random House or something, and I know they publish all kinds of anti-religion stuff, just as they publish pro-religion stuff, even there, if I had a choice, no, boss, could I work on the anti-religious stuff?
Yeah, James,
Boss,
James,
could
we
I-
want you on this project here for this new Bible, and we want you to really, because you're really smart, we want you to really push this one.
You know, there were cases, you know, as a DA, and maybe this is a good personal case study here. For 18 years, I was a public prosecutor, a deputy district attorney here in San Diego, and I don't approve of all the laws. I believe in law and order. I'm not an anarchist. I think that crimes against person and property, crimes of force and violence, those must be strongly enforced. And I know I took a backseat to no one on my aggressiveness in terms of those kind of crimes where people's rights were actually coercively violated. Yes, and I feel very strongly about that. But for example, I think that the laws against drugs and prostitution and gambling only create greater problems. They violate the rights of the people involved, even if they're acting self-destructively, even if I would disagree with the choices, perhaps, that drug addicts or street prostitutes make, or people addicted to gambling make. You know, but I'm thinking to myself, gee, we're doing is we're subsidizing organized crime. We're making the drug addicts in a more dangerous situation where they're more likely to die from corrupted drugs or drugs they don't really know the content of, like the fentanyl is killing so many people today. It's because, you know, they think it's one thing and they're taking another, right? That's the result of the law. If you could walk into a pharmacy and buy fentanyl, you'd at least know the quality and quantity you were getting. And it's the law that's killing people, not the fentanyl so much, if you see my argument there. Of course,
Yes.
it's fentanyl in one sense. But so I would have an option just to say, no, I'd prefer not to do that kind of case. When I started my career and I was just doing prelims and stuff, I really didn't have much of a choice. And I was just getting training. So I kind of had to do some of that. But as my career developed, I could ask for specialization. I don't want anything, or if I did want anything to do with drugs, okay, let me start the first drug court in San Diego and find a non-incarceration treatment alternative for drug addicts who have no violence in their record. So I was happy to do that. I was happy to soften in effect, the negative effect of drug laws. And so even as a DA, the laws of my state, I do not agree with all of them. I think some of them are downright evil. So I could direct myself away from those things insofar as I could. And I think sometimes that's really the only kind of option that we have. We kind of have to, if it's we do all this, and it's your initial training, I just got to gulp, bear it so I can get the training so I can go get those murderers and rapists. That's exactly how I looked at it. But then when I reached a point where I did have some kind of option and control of my career, I could then say, no, help me liberalize the drug laws and let me get the harshest sentence for the violent criminals. And so that's, I think, the best way to approach this. If understand that sometimes the context requires us to endure things that we may not necessarily like, but if there is a long-term value to be achieved there, if we can get some kind of control over this, say at a publishing firm or at a DA's office or wherever it is, at a university, or maybe it's the most important of all. Then we can really direct ourselves to the sort of projects that are positive, even if we're working in a mixed bag institution, like a university, like law enforcement in America today, if that makes sense.
It does. It does. And it's not pragmatic because you are working in a mixed system. It's not that you're going to work for a church, and if you do it long enough, you'll be able to undercut them. No, you're actually working in a legitimate function that is a mixed case.
That's it. And so some of these answers that Peikoff gave are sort of like situations where, no, you're volunteering to do the bad thing rather than mitigate that bad thing or try to avoid it or contextualize it, which is sometimes all we can do. Given our mixed world today, that's what, that often makes it very difficult for a committed, principled atheist to live in a world. Our country, America, is one of, I know we're an advanced Western country, but we're still a deeply religious country, especially for an advanced Western country. And we'll get into that next week because Dr. Peikoff has some wonderful answers on why America persists in its religiousness. But saving that for next week, that's often the case that we're in. We're in these mixed sort of bag situations all the time. And navigating through that can be a very, very tricky thing. But these answers, I think, are really good because it makes those distinctions. Are you advocating? Are you advocating? Are you regularly profiting from this specifically? Are you helping out the ideas in their advancement? Or are you really just supporting your friend in their personal wedding? Are you really just advancing your career in a mixed system and then getting to a point where you can assert your values in it? Because I think those are all very different contexts, and that context we have to be acutely aware of. Don't beat yourself up for living in a rotten society, but never, ever, ever, ever sanction the advocacy of an idea to be harmful.
Outstanding. Real quick thank you to Jeff Bannister, who is in for $20 Canadian. Jeff has been a supporter of the channel and the shows that we have done together. Very, very much appreciated there.
We love you, Jeff.
Yes. And Jeff says, you are amazing. He has that little sticker. No, Jeff, you are amazing.
You are amazing to me, sir. Thank you.
I'm okay with we're all amazing. Now, we are doing amazing things here on the ARC UK. The channel has had some shows come and shows go and changes, and exciting changes are right around the corner. More and more is going on. It has been an honor and an adventure to be part of this, and especially to see the work you, James, do here on the channel and on Sunday mornings, but multiple times throughout the week. You bring us great content. Of course, it's been great to co-host Peikoff Fridays with you. We thank you for that very much.
Well, I cannot imagine two better people to be having these conversations with. I mean, really, you guys are wonderful, and what you're doing for the world, it is hard for me even to estimate the benefit that you guys bring by bringing humanity and joy and love to our intellectual movement. And I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Coming from anybody, that would mean a lot, but especially from you, sir.
In some ways, that's as important as anything. As I say, it's been a tough 2 weeks, and the things that have helped me come through it, I think, intact and cope with it as well as I have, is having one, a rational philosophy, and two, having loving friends like you who understand it with me.
Well, thank you, sir. Very much appreciated. And I am looking forward to next week. We have talked about Ayn Rand and religion. We have talked about our personal lives and religion. But religion, Leonard Peikoff famously said, religion, a specter is haunting America, the specter of religion. I am eager next week, next Peikoff Friday, to talk about religion and America, and especially to hear, James, what you've got to say about that.
Yeah.
One more time, if you're not already supporting the Ayn Rand Center UK, aynrandcenter.co.uk, sign up to be a member. Become a member of the YouTube channel. Thank you to all of you who support the channel through your super chats, your contributions, your participation.
Yeah, and you can also support Robert and I if you like what we do on Sundays with our 5 Minutes with Robert and Amy podcast on Robert Nasir's channel. You can go to
Oh.
robertnasir.com, learn more about that, and you can become a patron or send us a little love.
And thank you so much to everyone.
One last thought. Do your selfish a big favor. Check out Robert Nasir. My God, all the content produced by the Nasirs is outstanding and inspirational, and it will improve your life. Check it out. Really. Trust me.
You are very kind and 100% right. So thank you,
Yes,
James.
I am.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We will see you on Peikoff Fridays next Friday. Until then, enjoy these resources, enjoy these ideas, apply them to your life, live well. We will see you then.
Take care. See you next week.